Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Season 2, Episode 9, Sweet and Elite. This is the episode in which Rarity ends up canoodling with some of the upper society members of Canterlot, and in so doing neglects her friend, and then once falls into what I call a sly storm, we'll talk about that later, until finally she learns the lesson of the week, which is kind of dumb, and then we move on. So, I don't agree with the overt message of the week either, but I actually still very much like this episode. You're probably looking at me like, why, Lore? Are you just dumb and stupid? Well, the answer to your question is yes, I am very dumb and stupid. However, the reason I like this episode so much has to do with the way it's constructed. First of all, Kaivuru Valem. Let's start at the beginning, because I have a very specific point I want to come to. Probably not Ethel. They might know her, but she wouldn't know them. Remember, prior to leaving Canterlot, she was a shut-in. You ever have that problem when you're so thankful for something you don't actually know how to express it? I have that problem constantly. It actually is. It's been an issue for me since I was a child. And I've literally gone through scenarios in my head of how to express how grateful I am without seeming like I'm being fake, because I'm not. I am legitimately grateful. I just don't know how to express that. So I just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it always feels like I'm failing miserably at it. Yeah, no, Lord Harriman is correct. Ironically, you'll notice Spike is not in this episode. And that's probably a deliberate choice by the writers, because Spike definitely knows who these ponies are. Remember, him being connected with Canterlot is kind of a thing, and will continue to be a thing going forward. Anyways. But yeah, I feel it for Rarity, who's just like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, because she's being put up in this really posh, nice place in a frickin' palace. I mean, I'd be pretty grateful. I don't know about you guys. I do gotta say, though, oh, yawn attack. The only thing I don't like about this episode, really, is the gags with the waiter. What's his name? Bags Valet. That's him. The valet. Because we have Princess Celestia, Queen Celestia, who is an extremely powerful alicorn. And then we have Rarity, who is a unicorn who can carry many things at once. And they have this poor dude carrying all her luggage. Now, I get it. It's a Jerry Lewis gag. I get it. You know, I used to watch Jerry Lewis, too. But, like, come on. That's so mean. Just carry your own... Hi. So, this was the actual first episode where I decided it makes perfect sense. Rarity is a wharf. I'm pausing because I'm curious what your guys' reaction to that idea is going to be. I've actually mentioned this before several times. Now, originally, and I've talked about this before, originally I was going to call this Wharf Effect. Then I found out that that actually refers to something else, and so I had to come up with a new name for it, and someone else, I wish I remembered who, but someone else came up with the term Sons of Mogh Effect. The Sons of Mogh Effect is when you are someone who aspires to an ideal, but the actual ideal you aspire to does not live up to its own ideal. So named for Worf, the one true Klingon, who is more Klingon than the actual Klingons are. Because the Klingons are mired in politics and infighting and fake honor and all sorts of gruck and corruption, whereas Worf is a very honorable person. Hence, Son of Mogh Effect. And you can probably see immediately how this applies to Rarity. She definitely aspires to that being noble thing, right? Like, absolutely. It's all over. It's been over since season 1. She is definitely someone who wants to be, yes, high society and posh and fanciful and definitely thing. But the problem is she aspires to the ideal of nobility, not the reality of it. This episode does a good job of showing us the reality of nobility and just how much stuck up. Someone in, Raskor in chat just said how stuck up these people really are. how horribly unpleasant these people actually are, and it's just wow. Now, that being said, there's actually another layer to that I'll cover in just a moment. But I just wanted to comment on that because this was the episode that actually gave me that thought and concept when I first saw it some time ago. You'll also notice, by the way, yeah, shallow is a good word here. The two people, Jet Set and Upper Crust, I'll talk about that in a second, come over and they are like, oh, wow. Now I want you to keep this in mind. The moment they find out that Rarity is from the country, they immediately dismiss her as insignificant and walk away, even though prior to that, they went completely out of their way to leave their table to go to hers just because her hat was so interesting and so well designed, they had to know where she got it from. That is the definition of shallow. Now, I said I'd talk about Jet Set and Upper Crust. They are, unfortunately, this is a cartoon still, so they do have to adhere to extremes. And so they're on the bad end of the extremes. They are the bad side of nobility and social currency. I'm going to be using that term a lot this episode, by the way. Yeah, no, they are definitely not weouts. I agree completely. They, there's people who make waves, and then there's people who are swept away by waves when it comes to these kind of things. Jet Set and Upper Crust are swept away by waves. Now, real quick, Upper Crust makes sense, right? The upper crust of society. How many of you don't know what Jet Set means? I'm actually quite curious. I had to look it up myself, so I didn't know until I looked it up. And while people respond, I'll go and tell you because, again, I looked it up. And the definition of jet set is a non-formal noun, or a plural noun, which refers to a wealthy and fashionable person who travels widely and frequently for pleasure. Never heard of that term before. Applies. You'll also notice Jet Set and Upper Crust both have like the same kind of style that they're going for themselves. It's just kind of ridiculous. I'll admit, if I could teleport, I would totally travel a lot too, but I don't think I'd ever be a jet set. Yes, today I'm water skiing in the Bahamas, tomorrow skiing. Yeah, that thing. I've heard of the concept. I've just never heard of the terminology referring to it as a jet set. Anyways, or a jet setter. So, so they're like, FNAF. Despite her uppiness, of course, despite the fact that Rarity is, upper crust, upper nobility, and is really embarrassed by, her affiliation with the countries and bumpkins, you'll notice she is still very much focused on the gift for Twilight. Now, this is important, not only for us, but for any kids watching this, because it helps to immediately distinguish her from the rest of the nobility. She still has at least the concept of giving and caring about others as an actual in-depth thing. You'll notice that the next thing that happens is she bumps into Fancy Pants. Now, she bumps into Fancy Pants, and she so casually mentions that she knows the queen. I'm going to just keep referring to the queen. Is that cool? Yeah, I would agree with that, weirdos. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why is that a big deal? Because it doesn't occur to Rarity that knowing the Princess of Canterlot might be a big deal. Instead, she just casually mentions it because it's a fact. I mean, why would that be a big deal, after all? It is, of course, also probably worth noting. So Fancy Pants will come up in the future. He's a minor recurring character. Like von Falkenstein, who is a minor recurring character, but nevertheless a very awesome character. Every time he shows up. Whoops. And thank you very much for the sub, von Falkenstein. Very much obliged, sir. I lost my train of thought. She so casually mentions that she's working with Celestia because, again, Twilight is so casual with working Celestia. And it's probably worth noting that she, was personally led up to her room, and she probably has been sending letters to her semi-frequently, since that's the thing for this season. So, okay, makes a degree of sense. Thus, she is then immediately somewhat of interest to Fancy Pants. I would say that Fancy Pants probably should know about the others, but he probably doesn't. Because I'm saying this wrong. Basically, I don't think the writers, it occurred to the writers to think about that. Hey, this is an appropriate song for this episode. I don't think it occurred to the writers, even though it definitely will occur in the future. Shrug. They don't. The show doesn't really acknowledge the hero status of the main six until future seasons, for good or for bad. I do got to take a moment and pause to talk about Fleur de Lis. It's rare that I see someone who is a trophy wife taken so literally, but the episode makes a point of every time the camera pans back to her, she is in a new and different pose, trying to show off how beautiful and wonderfully elegant she is, while Fancy Pants is just having his conversation. Now, this is interesting and horrible, because there's only two possibilities here. Either she's doing it of her own volition, or she's doing it to the behest of him. Now, if she's doing it of her own volition, whatever. Yeah, I don't care. That's her choice, sure. If she's doing it at his behest, that's horrible. Now, I don't think she's doing it at his behest for two big reasons. First of all, he wanders off without even really noticing, and she is the one who has to be like, oh, he's already left, I should go now. But second, and more importantly, he is being portrayed in a positive light universally, not only in this episode, but in future episodes. This is actually, weirdly enough, something I like about this show. Usually when the show shows a stereotype, it tries to show that stereotype as both good and bad. In short, there is a world of difference in between Fancy Pants and Upper Crust and Jet Set. You know, yeah, he's the nice noble, exactly. He is someone who has a decent amount of brand, the reasonable authority figure, I called it before, which I do think is an important thing to showcase in cartoons that kids are going to be watching, because they need to know that not everyone is going to be horrible of such and such. See Celestia for another example of this. Really minor touch. I like the bit that Fleur de Lis picks up the bag, and you can see it's colored a different color, and then the bag just kind of hovers over towards Rarity, and then the color shifts towards Rarity's magic color. A literal handoff of the telekinesis. It's a really minor point, but I do love the way they handle the telekinesis in this show. It's pretty consistent. And it's pretty logical, and it's a really minor bit of world building that they do consistently. I enjoy that, that's all. Moving on. So, here's that overworking thing for Rarity again. Okay, let's see. I can go to this ball and get lots of, you know, get people, and it'll be amazing and wonderful. But I also need to do this dress for my friend. Now, you notice she has not promised this dress to Twilight. That's actually an important thing to keep in mind. Twilight doesn't even know about the dress. She just wants to make it for her as a thank you. So she decides naturally to do both, even though that's going to be basically doubling her workload. Because of course she does, because she's Rarity. So then she goes to the society. We have another little insight into the society, because we see that the Wonderbolts perform for entertainment, which we've kind of already seen before, but this is probably the most clear-cut distinction of how the Wonderbolts are a regular feature of Canterlot entertainment. I mean, they're literally having a race, specifically for the entertainment of the people. You'll also notice, by the way, this is something the episode makes a point of several times. There's a clear distinction between normal people in Canterlot and the upper crust of the people in Canterlot. Even the normal people are more high society than what we're used to seeing in this show. But the actual upper crust are substantially higher society than the other people present. And I mean, there's even a locked off thing and everything, right? You know, in fact, the episode even goes out of its way to show that upper crust is not in the upper crust. That upper crust and Jet Set are down there, and the Royal Guard is protecting the way for the actual upper crust of nobility, which is where Fancy Pants is. And yeah, the obvious horse riding parallel there is obvious. I also like how Rarity several times just kind of says something and then immediately regrets it, but it tends to work out anyways. I'll cover that more in a minute. So, this is the first time Rarity lies. I really, really wish I had been keeping track of how many times Rarity lies in this episode, because it's a lot. Like, really, it happens all the frickin' time, how many times she lies. But the first line, or I noted the first line, which is, who's Rainbow Dash? Oh, she's the Wonderbolt's trainer. And it just snowballs from there. But that is a good thing to point out, Dream Whisperer. She does, like everyone else in the actual upper crust, I gotta distinguish that since there's a character named Upper Crust in this episode. Everyone in the actual upper echelons, they're just like, mm-hmm. And Rarity's like, yeah, go. Which is another thing that will be coming up later. I'll cover that in a minute. But it is the first time we see that in this episode. So, let me discuss the big thing I want to discuss about this episode, and that is the concept of social currency. It's hard to think of social currency in modern terms because it doesn't work the same way it used to, but there is still definitely social currency that is practiced in modern society, even everyday mundane modern society. How many of you, I don't know how many of you are going to say this, but how many of you like Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace? Honest question. I will not raise my hand here. I'm sorry. I do not like the film. There's some good moments there. Don't mistake me, but I do think it's a bad film. Sorry. But how many of you... So I've seen several people say yes, which is awesome. How many of you who have said yes have ever felt embarrassed to admit that? Especially in like a crowd or to friends or something like that? Now here's the final question, and this is the least likely one to be true, but I have seen this happen. How many of you have felt more comfortable admitting it because someone who is large-scale or famous has spoken positively about it? Or maybe like a group of people have spoken positively about it, more understanding about it, so it seems more socially acceptable to go ahead and admit that you like it. Now again, this is pretty unlikely, but this is the only analogy I could come up with in a modern society that might actually apply to you guys. You probably already see where I'm going with this. Yeah, I don't think this applies to any of you. It sure as hell applies to me. I have had many times in my life where I have felt embarrassed about admitting something that is true about myself that I enjoyed or don't enjoy, and I have felt more comfortable doing so because it became more socially acceptable. Now, granted, I am a hell of a social person. I am an extrovert who constantly loves talking to just about anyone and everyone. I talk to people. I plan to talk to people later today in the grocery store. But I definitely know that feeling. For the longest time, I was hesitant about even admitting that I like the very show that I'm covering right now, which I've liked for the better part of the last 2.5 years at this point, because of the fact that it was considered such an embarrassing thing, and there's the problems with the fandom and blah, blah, blah. Right? Social currency is a little bit different than that, but it is related to this. There's the phrase, it's all about who you know, but social currency is more about an artificial term of quality and judgment. So here's how this works. For those of you who don't care, forgive me for actually going into this. The montage song actually covers all this. But again, there's two aspects to social currency. The first is a method of quality. It's a method by which you can determine the quality of a thing based on what other people like. Is such and such a good show? Is such and such a good type of food? Or a good brand, or a good restaurant? Or maybe is such and such a good movie, or a good game, or a good game series? I imagine more of you can relate to this concept of social currency than the other one I'm about to talk about, because it's a way of trying to determine, because I want to distinguish this, it's a way of determining quality of something. And we see this several times. People automatically assume that certain things are of higher quality because either Fancy Pants likes them or Rarity likes them. And of course, the reason they are all so keen on Rarity is because of whom she knows, the Queen, and consequently Fancy Pants. So her opinion is worth listening to because their opinion is worth listening to. Which leads to the second part of social currency. Now that first part of social currency is pretty normal. Like that's a pretty normal part of society, and actually is probably an acceptable part of society. The second part is far more insidious, because the second part is when judgment comes into it. After all, you don't want to be the one person who disagrees with the crowd, right? Or someone who doesn't actually keep up with things. I mean, it's not like they're going to literally deride you to your face, but there's going to be that quiet judgment of, oh, you didn't actually know this. Or, oh yes, I'm sorry, you're not really in on this particular trend. That's okay. Or maybe you like something that isn't currently popular to like. That's one I have experienced a lot of my life, because I remember when liking Star Trek literally had kids trying to beat me up. I say trying to, because I would usually beat them up, but you get the idea. You remember that? I have been bullied for liking Star Trek. I imagine some of the younger amongst you can't really process that, because Star Trek is so much more acceptable nowadays, but back in the early 80s, or excuse me, mid 80s, early 90s, liking Star Trek was a big no-no in several circles. And I'm not even talking about video games. So we have that kind of judgmentalism aspect to social currency. Now you might be thinking, well, how is that an insidious thing? Because it tends to lead to a bit of stagnation, because nobody wants to be left out of the loop, so they kind of go along with the crowd to ensure that they are not left out of it. In short, they go along with whatever Rarity says because they don't want to be the one person who is seen as off, the one person who doesn't fit, right? And yeah, this is exactly how this kind of power can be completely misused and can lead to some bad stuff. This whole episode really discusses the concept of social currency surprisingly well. And it's funny because I don't know how deliberate that was on behalf of the writers. Yes, exactly, Dream Whisperer. It's also, there's a term for this in psychology, and forgive me, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically not wanting to be left out of the loop. You know, not wanting to miss out. And there's a psychological thing to human beings where we as human beings do not want to miss out. We don't want to lose out on something. It's like, oh, God, you know, I missed out on this, so... Probably Raskor. Probably. Anyway, sorry, let's move on. So, social currency, blah, blah, blah. You notice how there's a lot of unicorns in Canterlot? Like, percentage-wise, more unicorns than anything else. I only point that out because that's actually something that's kind of a recurring trend, which will actually come up later in Season 2. Hi, Kay. No, unfortunately, I've been meaning to act, and I keep forgetting to. I do that for my Star Trek stuff. Who wrote this episode? But yeah, this is Magic City, exactly. As we've actually mentioned before in this series, and as will be coming up in the future, each different area, with like the exception of Ponyville, usually tends to have a large number of one type of the three types of ponies. Which makes a degree of sense. But we'll see. We'll talk about that going forward. I just wanted to mention it because they're already kind of establishing that. Yeah, there's a little bit of that tribalism there. And again, that'll come up in the future. So, Rarity agrees to do even more stuff, falling behind on her personal project. And that poor Bags Valet. So yeah, Rarity herself falls into the social currency trap. You'll notice this. The most obvious way is she has a bit where she actually talks about this. She's talking about whether or not as she's leaving... She's like, okay, I can go home and I can make this dress for Twilight. Yeah, no kidding, act. Yeah, the cat is always her conscience, which is funny, because Opal's such a terrible cat. But yeah, she's talking this out loud, and there's this bit where she mentions, I should have written down the exact wording, if I don't attend the such and such, no one will ever want to listen to me again. No one will ever care about my opinion again. She flat out says out loud the exact problem of the judgmental social currency trap that I've already talked about. If I am seen as out of the loop, I will no longer be considered a very important pony, which, you know, goes back to the whole song thing. And therefore, I will no longer have social currency. That's why I call it that, by the way. And I will no longer be a part of the group, and I'll be judged and horrible, and I'll never be able to show my face in Canterlot again! Now, that is true, Weouds. This is why I say social currency isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the social currency trap is to think that at any point, if you slip out of bounds, you are effectively exiled. That's not true. I mean, it can be true in certain circumstances. I shouldn't say that, but it's usually not true. That's why I call it the social currency trap. Have to keep hoarding, rather than, as Lord Harrowmont rather correctly says, spending. Because you have to spend social currency. So, she decides to stay, sure. And this leads to this leads to the beginning of the lie storm. Her friends show up innocently, by the way, keep that in mind, and they decide to show up. They'll visit. Hey, Megan McCarthy, I do recognize that line. Yeah, Opal, she's so sick, and yeah, I'll totally. Oh my gosh, maybe I should go do this. Who doesn't like a scent of Kate frosting? You know. Quick side note, really quick, before I move forward. Is this the first time we've seen the party cannon in this show? It'll become a regular feature of Pinky in the future, but I don't recall seeing it before now. It's hard for me to keep track, admittedly, so I'm not sure. But I think this is the first time it's shown up. It'll even become a plot point in the future. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses, so maybe. So in terms of both musically and in animation, the show then immediately shows the contrast, poor Opal, between the two parties. Now, obviously, this is to show, this goes back to what we always talked about, the two sides of Rarity's life. The having fun with friends, corralling, and then the posh upper society. Now, I agree with that, first of all. Those are obviously the two sides of Rarity's own mentality. Because she does enjoy partying and having fun with her friends. And she does actually enjoy, being part of posh society. Here's the catch, though. I'm sure, Razgor. Here's the catch. The episode tends to show the inner area as better than the outer area. And I'm okay with that. But I think the real reason why I'm okay with that is because one of the more core messages of the episode is about sincerity. Inside, the party is a bunch of friends who at this point, we're midway through season 2, they are officially friends at this point. A bunch of friends who are just having fun with each other. Outside, it's a bunch of people who probably don't actually care about each other and don't actually want to be around each other, but because of the whole social currency thing, they have to. In short, and I know this is a cliched thing to say in an MLP episode, but the group inside is actually friends, and therefore they're having fun, and the group outside is not, and therefore they are not. We also see several little tidbits. It's all minor stuff that show just how fake the people outside are. The fake applause, the fake attempt at playing the cricket, or whatever the hell it is. The fake hair. Just the bit where the wig is torn off of someone. Blah, 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 blah. I'll check it, Ventures, don't worry. But yeah, by all means, fix whatever you gotta fix in your end, dude. Yeah, exactly, Aethel. And so we see this kind of contrast between the two, and they do a good job, both in terms of animation. Most of the outside party is very stiff, very, very slight motions, and inside they're, doing this. And of course the music is completely different. Versus for the inside stuff. Then I really should have been keeping track of how many times she lies, because this is when the lie storm really gets ridiculous. Just lies, lies, lies. Just every few seconds is another lie. This then leads to the part where they're like, oh, we should totally go outside. Now, if I could say, I mentioned there was only one thing that pissed me off about this, but I lied. There's a second thing. Rarity lies her face off throughout half the episode, and she gets away with it scot-clean. That irritates me. That's not the kind of thing I really want in general in fiction. Never mind something that I would like my niece to see, Moving on. So her lie is revealed, and they're just like, oh yeah, no, let's totally go outside and join you in the party. This then leads to our third musical variance. This is a Clowns in the Circus song. I believe there's actually a term for that, but I couldn't find a proper term. I actually looked. Not really, Lord Harmont. Although it's a very well done thing, but yeah. No, I've never liked that concept. A lot of kids' fiction tends to portray lying as a little thing and people getting away with it, which is not a good lesson. But anywho. So, Clowns in the Circus, and they run around, and Twilight... Can I just say Twilight dancing horribly is awesome? Like, unironically. That was great. I love that. Agreed, Dream Whisperer. Agreed completely. So, I know, right? Which brings me back to that whole social currency thing. One last time I'll bring this up. Oh, I would love that too, Lord Hermot. Yes, Baron, she's having a seizure. The distinction between Rarity and the others, that is to say, Rarity and her 5 friends, is made clear because, remember I mentioned they innocently misunderstand her? Like 4 times, actually. I haven't covered each individual instance, but they innocently misunderstand her, which leads to, comedy. But the reason it is so interesting is because they don't care about the social currency at all. They don't care about it so much that they don't even acknowledge that it exists. It's just not a concept for them. So most of what they do is completely shameless. And I don't mean in the, oh, that's horrible sense. I mean in the sense that it is absent with shame. Because of the fact that why would they be ashamed about having fun and being with themselves? It serves as a very stark contrast, both to Rarity and the other noble ponies there. Of course, then this is why Fancy Pants is in the show, because he is the good stereotype. I already actually talked about this. He genuinely... Notice that the episode makes this very clear, because what happens is the 2 jackasses over there, Jet Set and Upper Crust, are like, humph, she made that terrible dress. And then Fancy Pants says, wow, I rather like it. It's got a nice charm. I like your friends, too. Which immediately leads to Jet Set and Upper Crust coming over and saying, yes, I'd like to buy 3 immediately. Very stark contrast between the 2 types of nobility there. And again, one right off to the other. This is why I agree with, I forget who said this earlier, that I think Fancy Pants is so high up on the totem pole, probably number 2 on the totem pole, honestly, right below Celestia, that he doesn't actually care about the social currency thing anymore. He doesn't have to. He just does what he actually does and likes what he actually likes. I do think Fancy Pants actually liked the dress. It's just kind of the type of persona he portrays. There's a genuineness to him, which is astonishing and hilarious given the circumstances, but it's there. Looking at my notes here. But yeah, then the episode ends on this big message. I didn't even write it down. I forget. It's like you never lose sight of where you're from. I mean, who cares? I remember the town I was born in. I visited it once. No, twice after that. Who gives a damn? I think the more important messages could be about the social currency thing, not to go to extremes, and about what I think is probably the actual real message of the show, which is more about sincerity. To be completely blunt, even though Fancy Pants isn't a good example of this, in my experience, most people who are actual trendsetters are trendsetters because they don't care about setting trends. They just do. Because they are who they are, and other people naturally tend to gravitate to that. Just my opinion. Anyways, a really quick side note. Did anyone else notice? So we have a couple things. First of all, the episode absolutely ends in a wah-wah. This is one of the more overt ones we've had lately. Can I put this luggage away? Wah-wah. So hang on, where's our thing? Where's our thing? There we go. So let's add up the wah-wah thing. Depends on what I am, Baron, and how powerful I am. But I could probably manage it. It's certainly a nicer city than any city in real life. So yeah, wah-wah goes up. I want to add 2 marks to the continuity counter. The first is most obvious. But the second is, if you were paying attention, and I actually caught this and I rewound just to double check it, the columns in the background of the gala area where they're partying are all cracked. That's some nice attention to detail. And that actually made me grin, I'll completely admit it. Where's my notes? I guess we odds. That's fair, Imperial Star Destroyer. The restaurants there are terrible. Unless we find that one Indian place that has really good food. And I would go there every day, by the way. To the actual good food place. Holy crap. Yeah, funnily enough, I think they got rid of Blue Blood. I don't think he shows up in the rest of the show. And good riddance, I might add. Anyways. Let's go ahead and do this, and then this. Okay. So the next episode... Hang on, let me go ahead and chop off really quick, first of all.